A couple was facing a statue with a palpable tension in the air. The girl wishes for him to like her. The redhead remains silent for a moment before caressing her face. That was everything she had ever wanted. To feel his hands caressing her and his embrace at night. The two exchange kisses that leave the girl enchanted. She was feeling loved by someone. Truly, finally. At that moment, the man confesses that he also wants her to like him. But it wasn't just that. He wanted her to like him so much that she would lose her own essence. And he questions whether she could really be that person. 15 days ago, at the city port, Veronica was ready to go home when she ran into two girls who asked if she was really going home. And the two said that since it was her birthday, she should enjoy it. And they pulled the woman to have some fun. Veronica awkwardly laughed, saying that her father was already waiting for her at church, which seemed to be something routine there. But Veronica says goodbye and apologizes for not being able to go with them. As soon as Veronica walks away, one of the women comments to the other that Veronica was definitely lying. One of them felt sad to see the protagonist having to pretend to be okay, but the other only noticed how she was seeking the love of others to compensate for the lack of love from her family. While walking to the church through the small village, the protagonist made a point of greeting everyone with a beautiful smile. And one of the women she was talking to asked why she had those flowers in her hands, to which Veronica replied that they were her mother's favorites, and maybe it would make her father happy. The woman couldn't understand why the girl continued living with him, suggesting that she should get married and get out of there. That's when she overheard a conversation between two guys about red eyes. She asked the girl if she knew what it was about. Veronica gets a bit tense with this story and asks if it was the monster with the red eyes. All this talk about monsters left her unsettled, and she hoped nothing bad would happen that day. In front of the church, the girl seemed to muster the courage to enter, remembering when she begged her father to let her go with him there, receiving a door slammed in her face as a response. So she just needed to smile and try again, and that way, she was sure her father would notice her presence. Besides, it was her birthday, and she was sure something good would happen. But even from the outside, she didn't know why the church was so quiet. Questioning whether everyone was inside, she opens the door, beaming a smile and calling for her father. But her face turns to surprise upon seeing what she found, causing her to drop the bouquet of flowers she had brought. The scene inside was like a horror movie. All the worshippers were lying on the floor with their heads missing. Shocked, she screams for her father. Veronica desperately searches for her father until she finds one of the fallen wearing the same clothes her father was wearing that morning. Kneeling and trembling with fear, she couldn't believe what was happening. Even not being loved by him, Veronica didn't wish for this end. That's when she felt a touch on her back from something that was nowhere near human. As she turned around, she found a giant creature that looked like a gargoyle. Scared, she starts to stutter while trying to speak. Looking at the red-eyed monster's Bahamut, the creature crouched down and began to approach her slowly, until it touched her chin. Sometime later, still in the church, a man seeing the woman on the floor wonders if she is a survivor? While Veronica opens her eyes, which now are no longer black but red, just like Bahamut's. Veronica, still somewhat unconscious, sees as if she were outside. She wonders why everyone is looking at her. In a moment of delirium and neediness, for a second, she thinks that maybe everyone finally loves her. But that only lasted until she heard a scream and saw people running away from her as if fearing for their own lives. Not understanding, she approaches a boy who fell while running, begging him not to leave. But the boy turns in horror towards her, screaming for the monster to stay away from him. But Veronica was confused. Monster? What do you mean, monster? The reality is that she now had the eyes of the gargoyle that attacked her. That's when she awoke from what seemed to have been just a dream. Her body felt strange and as if it were much hotter than normal. Her vision blurry. She coughs, feeling her throat tighten with thirst. An uncontrollable thirst. Upon seeing the red marks on the ground, her mouth fills with water. Convinced that it was water, she begins to approach as if she were hypnotized. She tries to reach the small puddle, but is stopped when someone pulls her hair. It was the same redhead as before, saying that he knew she had been corrupted. Veronica, trying to break free, asks who that man is. The man, looking at Veronica's desperation to reach the red puddle, asks her if she really wanted to drink that thing on the ground. Without waiting for an answer, he explains to her that it will not quench her thirst. As Veronica continues to struggle, trying to break free, he continues explaining that she would either die of thirst or her head would explode. Either way, the end would be the same. And he asks if Veronica really would like to stay alive, which catches her attention. The mysterious guy asks if she really would like to continue living, even if it meant spending her entire life going through the trials of hell. Noticing her silence, he insists on the question, explaining that if she wanted to rest forever, he could do that for her in a painless way. That question about whether she wanted to live or not echoed in the girl's head. She remembers when her mother passed away and had to hear the rumors about how she drained her mother's life. The children were also very cruel, saying that Veronica's father said she should die every day, and as if they were in her place, they preferred that instead. When she finally opens her mouth, she says that she has never wanted to die in her life. For a moment, it is possible to see pity in the man's eyes. He releases her hair. While crying, she for the first time says that she really wants to live. The redhead looks at her seriously, saying that if that was the case, it was fine, and he gives her a gentle scratch on the back of her neck. Congratulating her for being reborn as a monster, he leans closer to her face, kissing her. Wow, do we have a record here? A kiss in the second chapter. Just how I like it. The protagonist thinks about how refreshing those lips were. So refreshing that they quenched her thirst, which made her question if the man in front of her was actually a god who came to save. She was confused, and asks what he had done to her exactly. Then, calling her a monster, the man explains that he saved her, but she should listen carefully to what he had to say, as they didn't have much time. While putting his cloak on her, he explains that she had been corrupted by a monster named Bahamut. Those who were corrupted normally died unless they received divine power. Veronica is confused by what the man is saying, until she looks to the side and sees her father again, remembering why she was there in the first place. Despair returns, and she calls for her father, but the guy tells her to stop thinking about nonsense, and states that from then on she should only do what he commanded. Outside, they could hear the shouting of citizens pleading for mercy, as they were not criminals, while other people were telling them to be quiet until everything was confirmed. Among them was the vice commander of the Order of the Holy Knights, Philip Wittelsbach. One of his soldiers asks what to do if they found someone who had been corrupted. Philip states that these creatures were traitors to God. Therefore, they should be killed as soon as seen. Inside the church, the redhead protected Veronica. The girl becomes extremely nervous hearing that, and her savior explains that they were in a complicated situation. Suddenly, he picks her up in his arms. She screams, asking what he was doing, and the redhead explains that for now, she should just close her eyes and stay quiet, unless she wanted to be caught by those guys. The army subordinate tells Philip that there were no more survivors in that area, and asks if he wanted him to search inside the church. But before he could respond, the redhead shouts that there were no survivors there either. Smiling, he says that Philip rushed in his search. Dismissing the guard, Philip comments that it had been a while since he last saw Leon. The redhead asks who those tied-up people were, and the commander says they were survivors from the city. They were heading towards confirmation of the inspection to see if they had been corrupted or not, and the redhead looks at that seriously. Leon comments that those who were corrupted had red eyes like Bahamut. Hearing that, Veronica panics but tries not to say anything. Leon sighs, questioning why he passed the vice commander position to Philip. Irritated by the provocation, Philip responds that the position was never passed to him, but received with honor, as Leon never had the right to be commander. After all, he had fled from his duties and abandoned the knights who were under his care, besides having betrayed God. Irritated, Leon watches him in silence. While Veronica questions whether the man holding her was really Leon, Burke Philip finally notices the girl in the arms of his former colleague and asks who she was. Leon looks at Veronica in his arms, who has her eyes closed, and teases Philip by asking if he really needs to ask that. After all, it didn't matter to him. If God's corrupted son was going to roll in the hay with a woman, and with a mischievous laugh, says that by this point even God had given up on him. To which Philip responds indignantly that a person who claimed to be so devout shouldn't have so much lust. He was super angry when Leon turned his back on the sour blonde who was still shouting that God would never forgive him. Later, the two were hiding in a barn while the girl asks him to let her go, to which Leon replies that he appreciated being treated like a criminal, since it wasn't like he had saved her life or anything like that. But she ignores this and asks if he was really Leon Burke, the hunter of Bahamut. She had heard about him, about his red hair with a scar on his face and his black cloak. Even the children knew of his fame. Leon asks if Veronica knew what kind of monster Bahamut was, to which she hesitated to respond. In that world, the Bahamuts appeared out of nowhere one day. People didn't even know what to call them. Demons, monsters. While others believed they were personifications of divine punishment, Veronica's friends kept saying that Bahamut only harmed those who refused to follow God's ways. And the knights were taking care of that, especially since the city they lived in was loved by God, and the people were very devout. At least that was the atmosphere until the city was attacked. This thought makes Veronica despair at the idea that God had abandoned them. Meanwhile, Leon prepares the fireplace, explaining that the chances of a human becoming corrupted were slim, because when a human without any divine power was corrupted, they formed a mental connection with the monster. but normally they went insane and died before that. So to survive, that human would need a lot of reserved divine power. And let's agree that it's a great way to pass divine power, huh? The guy was nearing the end of his explanation when Veronica interrupted him to ask something, leaving him somewhat stressed. Then she says that if he hunted monsters, and as the other knights had already said, the corrupted humans should be killed. She wanted to know why he saved her. Flashbacks passed through the redhead's mind of when he was in front of the church and spotted Baramut's in front of him, with those penetrating eyes. Seeing that the guy had spaced out, Veronica resumes her question. Then, Leon says that she asked him to save her, and getting closer, explains that he believed that only she had the ability to end that dreadful situation. But the girl is confused, and says that if he thought she was capable of doing something grand, he was very wrong, because she had never even held a sword in her life. Leon explains that he didn't need her to do something grand. The Bahamuts were not just bloodthirsty monsters, but they could also reproduce by consuming human brains, meaning if they ate the entire city, they would reproduce an entire city of monsters. So, the hope was that if they killed one Bahamut, all its offspring would also die. He explains that this, of course, was just a hypothesis, right? But he wanted to know if all the monsters that existed there could have originated from just one. Thus, following this line of thought, if they found the original, they could end it. But Veronica didn't understand her relation to the whole situation. And Leon explains that she mentioned she had heard of Bahamut before, so he wanted to know what these monsters looked like. The protagonist, who had always heard that the monster had no head and had a single red eye in its chest. It's then that she realizes that the Bahamut she saw in the church shouldn't have a head, much less 2 eyes. She gets nervous, commenting that the creature she saw definitely had a head and 2 eyes. And Leon agrees, stating that he believed she saw the original Bahamut, and if his hypothesis was correct, she would be the only human connected to him. That's why what he wanted from her was simple. He wanted them to stay close and share any visions she had, so she wouldn't even need to use a sword. Veronica recaps, asking if he wanted to use her as a tool, because if that were the case, he wouldn't need her, just her eyes. And the guy is ironic, saying that she was smarter than she seemed, leaving her irritated. The protagonist asks what proof he had, that she had been corrupted by the original monster. And how would she know he was telling her the truth? After all, he didn't have the best reputation within the kingdom. Leon Burke was known for being a prestigious knight, a prodigy who received the sacred sword while still young. However, one day he broke everyone's trust, betraying all his companions in one of the worst battles the knights had ever seen. They called him various names. She knew she wouldn't achieve anything good by associating with that man. Therefore, she refused to go with him, saying that she was grateful for having saved her life, but she would not follow a stranger. It was then that she felt her heart falter, falling to the ground in front of her. While Leon watched her in silence, he apologizes for not mentioning it before, that she had no choice. According to him, either the girl followed him or her head would probably explode with that corruption, so she only had those 2 options. He smiles, saying he could give her proof, if she wanted, clearly making her tense. It is when he pulls out his sword, and the girl continuously begs him to wait and have mercy, but it is too late when he leaves a wound on her neck. Leon asks if she wanted more proof that without him her fate was already sealed. Desperate, the girl screams that the boy should protect the weak, not kidnap and threaten people. He pulls her chin closer, asking what more she would need to understand one very simple thing. She was no longer an ordinary weak and defenseless girl. Now she was the creature thirsty for blood and flesh. Approaching the protagonist, Leon remembers that she said she wanted to live, while the girl cried, thinking that he was her savior. She tells him to go to hell, to which he responds that he would gladly go, before kissing her intensely. The next day, the guy was preparing his horse, reminding Veronica that from that moment on, as he had already mentioned before, if she had any hallucinations or dreams, she should tell him. It was then that he noticed the girl didn't seem to be paying much attention. Instead, she was looking at the horizon, wondering what to do. Her whole life had collapsed all at once, and she was lost. It was then that she felt something warm on her back. It was Leon putting a jacket over her shoulders. Curious, she asks why he was going so far. Leon says yes, Veronica was a monster, but she was a monster he needed, and she could take that gesture as a kindness. Hearing that she was someone who needed him was different, and despite his intentions not being the best, it was the first time someone needed the protagonist for something, and she intended to use that to stay alive as long as she could. A few days later, the two were traveling on horseback. They had arrived in Asseldorf, a neighboring city to her hometown. He warns that they would spend the night there, as the streets were very crowded and it was better for her to stay at the inn. Veronica could smell a very strong odor from that city. She couldn't tell where it was coming from, but she was sure it was blood. Suddenly, Leon touched her wound on her neck, which startled her, wanting to know what he was doing. To which the redhead responds that he noticed the cut was still there and tells her to keep applying medicine there, because the divine power that was given to her was enough to keep her mind stable, but it didn't help with the wounds. The girl was shy, remembering the kiss they shared. She didn't really know what Leon thought because he was very frightening at first, but during their journey, he was very careful, telling the girl to pay attention, making food for her and questioning if she was really okay. During the trip, he handed a bag to Veronica, the only sleeping bag he had. In fact, that was why he gave it to her. There in that room, she questioned herself if this didn't go beyond the limits of the kindness he claimed to be showing. She remembered her friend's words, who told her to stay alert when men were kind, because they were much darker than they seemed. Therefore, she decided to ask something to the guy. She wanted to know if they would have to share the bed in the room or what. She was visibly nervous while Leon smiled, questioning why, since they had already kissed anyway. So there shouldn't be a reason they couldn't sleep together. What, no matter how much she was expecting an answer to this, caught her by surprise, leaving her blushing. Veronica screams desperately, asking how a holy knight could do that to a woman and kiss her so many times without necessity. To which he responds with another question, wanting to know if she was judging someone who was taking care of a child. But she says she was already 20 years old and was an adult. Moreover, the protagonist also comments that he seemed to have reacted as well when he kissed her. Provoking a little more, he says it was precisely because she was exactly his type. Diverting from the embarrassment, Veronica comments that she didn't know that the holy knights had preferences in women, which explains that half of those guys from the holy city of Carta broke their vow of celibacy. What Veronica says she doesn't believe because it's disgusting on their part, and Leon teases her, saying he agrees with her because they really are vulgar and dirty. Anyway, he gets up saying he would take a little round in the area and tells her to take a shower and rest, leaving her alone there, thinking about how strange the guy was. During the night, they were both sleeping when Veronica started to move. In her dream, she was facing a lit city made of gold and wondered where this place was. But that was certainly not what she wanted. When she looked to the side, she found a human, just like her, calling for help and calling her a monster. Seeing his situation, the girl started to salivate, feeling that it was delicious. Before lunging at the guy to devour him, she wakes up startled. How is it possible she did that to someone? Disturbed, she wonders if it was real or just a dream. However, for some reason, it seemed that it wasn't enough. While staring at Leon, she thought she needed more. She just needed a little more. When she climbed on him, ready to attack, she was looking for the perfect spot. Looking at him like a true psychopath, she approaches. But before she does anything, she realizes what she was doing, denying that she was a monster. The girl trembled all over with her conflicting feelings. That's when Leon gets up and kisses her. He lets her go, asking if a man couldn't rest in peace there. While crying, the protagonist explains that her heart was hurting a lot, which catches Leon off guard. Veronica says that for the first time she really felt like Bahamut, talking about her dream and how the night at her feet looked delicious, and that's why she attacked him. Seeing the girl in tears, Leon explains that that wasn't her, saying that the woman in front of him hadn't done anything wrong. His words remind her of her father, saying it was all her fault and that her mother died because of her. She remembered how she had to hold back because every time she cried, her father told her to stop pretending to be a defenseless creature. Now there was a man in front of her saying she could let it all go and cry as much as she wanted. It was such a strange situation to have someone she barely knew saying everything she wanted to hear for so many years. It was like she was dying, and she confessed. She felt like she was burning alive, and for some reason, Leon Burke was the only one who could ease her pain. That's why she moved towards the boy, knowing she couldn't let him go. It was as if they were the only two people in that terrible world. When the girl fell asleep, Leon finally could reflect on the dream she had told him about. That city could only be the city of Carta, which probably indicated that it was Bahamut's last destination, but that would be the worst possible scenario. While dreaming, the girl called for her father and other people who seemed dear to her, and the redhead watched her calmly. He was surprised that someone who had been through so many tragedies was still there, and he felt this affection for those people who had hurt her so much. Unfortunately, he knew that only tragedy awaited her in the future. Even so, she would always have this deep connection with him because of the curse. The next day, they were both eating when he handed a small gift to Veronica, who couldn't believe it was for her. But he quickly cut the mood, saying she could pay him back later. Seeing her hesitate, he asks if she didn't like it, explaining that he had chosen it especially because of her eye color. Touched, Veronica says she really liked the gift. especially because camellias were her favorite flowers. Being honest, she says she always wanted a weapon to call her own, but never imagined she would receive one as a gift. Changing the subject, Leon notices that the girl had put medicine on the wound on her neck, but he says she should spread a little more or it wouldn't work. Awkwardly, the protagonist asks if the boy next to her had any idea that he left her quite confused from time to time. Asking that if he was going to be grumpy, he should keep it up, because she wasn't used to receiving so much kindness, so she got confused easily. If he decided to be mean to her, then let him do it, because this constant change was leaving her more confused. Noticing that Leon was laughing at her comment, she questions what was so funny, which he tries to disguise. While other people in the inn commented on how cute they were, believing they were a couple, Leon asks her to stop being angry and go back to eating, because she must have been quite hungry, considering last night the protagonist feels embarrassed and says she wouldn't talk to him if he continued with that attitude. However, her stomach growls, breaking the mood, making things even more awkward. Leon explains that that breakfast was prepared just for her, and he would be honored if she accepted at least one bite. Veronica looks at the man seriously before taking the piece of meat in her hand. Leon watched the girl attentively, thinking it would be good if she had some affection for him. After all, winning her favor might make her easier to handle, since people in love are blind to everything else. The protagonist explored the inn until something caught her attention. It was a photograph of a woman with the flowers she loved so much. A girl speaks from behind Veronica, saying she reminded her of the girl in the photo. The lady says that was her daughter, who had recently married and moved to the city of Carta. She also comments that she had heard that she was now a grandmother, but since they lived far away, she hadn't been able to meet her grandchildren yet. Despite the distance being hard, she was happy for her daughter. Her words leave Veronica emotional, saying that the lady must love her daughter very much. Moving to a delicate subject, the lady asks if the man accompanying the protagonist was her husband, and if they were running away to be together, given the amount of luggage. Anyway, the kind woman caresses Veronica's hair, asking her not to go too far, and to think about how her parents would miss her. The words hit Veronica deeply, which makes the lady ask if everything was okay, since the girl was crying. Changing the focus, she explains that she missed her mother. Being comforted by the lady, Veronica was already in tears when Leon arrived with his usual expression. Then the lady quickly pulls him, leaving the protagonist curious and asks them to hold hands that way. Veronica stammers, saying he wasn't her husband, but before she can finish the sentence, Leon grabs her hand, surprising her as if it were a form of support, and the two stare at each other for a moment. The lady continues with her tasks, telling the protagonist not to cry anymore. While still holding Veronica's hand, Leon jokes that now they were married and asks how much longer they would stay there holding hands. Embarrassed, she quickly lets go of his hand with that comment, saying it was him who took her hand and she never called him husband. Again, she feels a strange tightness in her chest, which makes her freeze with the bad feeling. Leon questions what is happening. Veronica says she felt weird, explaining that it was as if she felt the presence of Bahamut. In the city, some monsters were spreading despair around, making people scream, destroying everything they saw in front of them. When they hid outside the inn, they managed to see that the city was already being attacked. She wonders how the monsters got past those huge walls, and upon seeing one of Bahamut's eyes, she feels as if he was looking directly at her. The monster starts moving towards the two, and the protagonist becomes increasingly confused about how he knew where they were hiding. It was then that she felt several eyes watching her from below. She pulls Leon to warn him, stating that she could feel them there and they probably entered through the sewers. The knight asks how many there were exactly, but she didn't know. However, if she was right, there were enough to fill that city with monsters screaming when she said they needed to get help. Maybe call the Order of the Holy Knights. She remembers what happened in her city, and that it might not be good for the knights to go there, since they treated everyone as corrupted after the attack. She was confused because that was the only way to save the city they were in, and trying to calm down. Since they managed to leave her city unnoticed, maybe they could do it again. Leon asks if she thought the knights did nothing all day, just waiting for a call. They wouldn't come quickly enough just because of that. Still, the protagonist, seeing all those monsters, says they couldn't just wait, so the city would have to solve its own problem. Veronica pulls him, questioning if he could do that, save that place. Leon looks at her seriously before answering that they should look for a hiding place. Heading towards the monsters, the protagonist stared at him, leaving with concern if he would be okay. He was Leon Burke after all, and there was no reason to worry. Many soldiers were in despair, doing nothing, while Leon was already tired from fighting so much. Some soldiers shouted nearby, telling to protect the gates. It was then that Leon realized that this battle was not going to work out. Meanwhile, Veronica was directing the common citizens to a safer place. It was when they pulled her by the collar of her dress. It was Leon with a serious expression. The protagonist asked what he was doing since they needed to evacuate the people, but all he said was that she should grab her belongings. The girl even tried to question him. Leon explained that the bridge over there would be raised soon, and the citizens had no idea how the monsters were really getting in. Anyway, the army there wouldn't be enough, so they had to escape quickly to avoid the same fate as everyone in that city. Thus, Veronica questioned whether he was planning to leave everyone behind. But all the redhead said was that they couldn't save everyone. They could only make choices. And at that moment, he chose to save her. Since he believed that saving her life was better than saving Beowyn and Asseldorf, Veronica couldn't swallow that, questioning how they could abandon all those people. However, Leon said she should obey him unconditionally. With a cold expression, he asked if he hadn't been clear enough. Quickly, the protagonist grabbed all her belongings at the inn, and she was taking them down the stairs. It was when she accidentally slipped, falling to the ground. She felt her heel pulsing with pain. Even so, she tried to compose herself. Remembering that Leon was on guard outside alone at that moment, she needed to be strong. After all, it was she who chose to stay alive. So she continued on despite the pain, remembering that. Upon reaching the exit door, several men were staring at her, asking if she was leaving, and confronting her, saying she was out of her mind if she thought it was a good choice. So the girl explained that someone was waiting for her outside and they didn't need to worry. Soon they realized she was with the man outside, and they knew he was the famous Leon Burke, and one of the citizens shouted not to let the girl leave, as judging by the bag she was carrying, they were planning to leave the city behind. A murmur formed about how the holy knights were abandoning them, and how that wasn't fair, as they always paid their tithes. It was when she encountered the lady who had seen her in the hallway earlier. She was desperate and pleaded for them to wait at least until they repaired the barrier that protected the city, as she was worried about Veronica, explaining that as soon as the wall was functioning properly, they would be safe. Her words made Veronica remember the citizens of the city that had been destroyed before this one, but she said that the city was not safe, leaving everyone confused. Veronica explained that the monsters hadn't come from outside the city through the wall. They were emerging from underground. So, strengthening the walls wouldn't help anyone. But she shouted louder, saying it was already done and they had to get out of there. A bearded man said they couldn't leave that house based solely on the girl's information, because leaving a safe place would be madness and they wouldn't stop her. But they trusted in the safety of the walls. Veronica even tried to counter, but it was better not to waste any more time on that. And before leaving, she just said that everyone has the power to choose their own destiny. The lady said goodbye, asking the protagonist to be careful, especially for the sake of her parents. Smiling, the protagonist thanked her for her kindness and said she was truly grateful for their hospitality. As soon as she left the inn, Leon was already waiting for her with the horse, urging her to hurry. He took her hand to help her mount the horse. Quickly, the two set off. Leon asked her to stop thinking about other things and just hold on tight because they would be running a lot from now on. Without looking back, the two left the city, leaving the citizens of Alseudorf behind. Soon behind them, the bridge was raised, closing the wall and all those monsters inside. Veronica watched the city, wondering if all the citizens would indeed perish. She blamed herself as she had had a strange feeling since they arrived there, but she ignored it because she thought it was just an illusion and regretted not having said anything earlier. Leon comforted her, saying that the outcome would still be the same. Moreover, the two escaped from there by his order, so it was just his decision to abandon that place. At that moment, the protagonist understood why Leon insisted that she should obey his orders. He did this so she wouldn't feel guilty about anything that happened. So it wasn't exactly an obligation, but rather an exoneration of guilt. Alone, Leon decided to carry all the remorse and guilt on his shoulders. When they were far from there, Veronica dismounted the horse, thanking the animal for having taken them safely. Remembering the terrible scene of Asseldorf, trying to stay optimistic, she asks Leon what the horse's name was, and he says it doesn't have a name. The protagonist questions if she could name it, but the grumpy redhead says no. She asks why, and he explains that he doesn't name things that are likely to die. The girl gets scared but tells the horse not to mind those words because it would live a long life, and she decides to name him Night Sky. Strangely, those comforting words directed at the horse were what she wished to hear at that moment. Once they were settled there, Leon was taking a look at the protagonist's foot, which had been hurt. He asks when that happened, and she explains the situation from earlier. Veronica observes his movements as he makes a sort of snowpack to put on the injury. He comments that he believes it isn't broken, but still, she shouldn't move it too much for now. Veronica, moved, thanks him and says it's the first time someone has done something like that for her. Since childhood, she has always been very clumsy, but she always ended up having to deal with the consequences herself. She starts to say that maybe this is like, but she gets embarrassed and changes the subject. Asking if he wasn't cold, she offers to return his cloak, but Leon says it's not necessary, and that they would have to sleep close together anyway to warm each other's bodies and not freeze during the night. It felt strange to be so close to him after everything. She brings up the topic, asking what she should do if she wakes up in the middle of the night again. Nervous, the protagonist explains that she would feel bad if he lost a night's sleep because of her again. However, he simply says that she probably wouldn't wake up this time. This makes Veronica curious and asks how he knows that. He explains that it's because he would take care of it before they sleep. Then he takes the opportunity and kisses her again. I'm starting to suspect that he's taking more advantage of this situation than anything else, but that's okay, because we like it. Lately, she felt an immense desire that she couldn't control to be so close to the guy like that. She believed it was the result of Bahamut's desires and the hunger she needed to satisfy. Even though she made a point of repressing that feeling, this man, who was superior to others, constantly placed his delicious divine power on her. Deep down, it made her desire him more and more, almost as if she wanted to devour him and have him all to herself. The desire was so strong that her thought was that if she couldn't have him, she would prefer to be buried by this man's hands. Indeed, she felt like an uncontrollable animal. As soon as Leon pulls away, Veronica asks for a little more. While looking at her expression, he asks if she has always looked like that. Maybe it was the eyes. But Leon concludes that maybe he was just attracted to that woman. For him, it was natural that any man wouldn't be able to resist. And he also thought he needed to work hard to repress his own desires regarding Veronica. We will never know what that horse witnessed that night. The next day, the protagonist was irritated, asking if Leon had gone crazy. But Leon was sure they had to reach the sacred city of Karta as quickly as possible. After all, in her last vision, everything indicated that Bahamut's target was the place. If the city were attacked, there would be no one to save the continent from that abomination. Veronica agrees, but she thinks it's crazy for them to try to cross the sacred plains like that, especially since he is a holy knight. She asserts that he knows as well as she does that the sacred plains are a blessed land that houses the great temple, and that everyone says that those who step there without permission are punished by God. According to the redhead, they didn't have much time, and it didn't matter if the land was blessed or cursed. They had to cross it. The girl tries to argue, but again he imposes his will, saying that she should do exactly what he says, and that she didn't need to hear her opinions. Upset, Veronica sits in a corner waiting for him to finish the preparations and thinks that he didn't need to be so rude to her, since she was only worried about him. She knew there was no salvation for a corrupted human, but he was a knight. After finishing arranging things, Leon goes to meet her, extending his hand to call her to leave. Sulking, the girl stands up, saying that she could do it alone, but soon trips over her own foot, and barely avoids falling to the ground, being held by the guy, who says that if she needed a hug, she could just say so. This makes her extremely nervous, and she quickly steps away. The protagonist remembers that she shouldn't be confusing her like that, since not long ago he had been rude, and now he was acting this way. He ends by asking what he expects from her. The redhead looks at her with a cold expression that we already know will lead to something bad. Getting closer and repeating his question, "What do I want?" He warns that he has already said several times that he wanted, taking the protagonist's hand. He asks her to stop running away from him. After all, regardless of what happened, he wouldn't let her go. They could cross the sacred land or go straight to hell. Until they managed to capture the monster, he wouldn't leave her behind. Since to end that tide of evil, he needed her. Then he asks if she is still angry. He notices how red she is. And I'm starting to worry about this male lead. He is being manipulative with her and sometimes is genuinely falling in love. This won't end well. The guy comments that her heartbeat was very fast. She pulls his hand, saying that if it was just for that reason that he insisted on her, he should keep acting like a jerk, affirming that it was unfair. As he approached, she really thought he was very unfair, since as a knight, he gave everything to God. And in the end, he hadn't even asked her name all this time, which made her feel more and more suffocated. But she changes the subject, saying that they should leave soon. She just wanted the guy to stop saying he needed her because no one could leave him after hearing something like that. Near the horse, she urges Leon, thinking that she was letting her worth be determined by other people. A few days later, they had arrived at the sacred plains, or at least close to it. That's when Veronica realized that there was already someone there, and she points out to Leon the camp that was nearby. Suddenly, someone shouts for them to stop, which makes the protagonist hide in Leon's arms. The armed men threaten them, saying that if they took one more step, they wouldn't leave the two alive. The guy orders them to identify themselves, and Leon introduces himself as a former guard of Asseldorf, saying that they are traveling to Karda, he and his wife. The man quickly smiles, saying that it was a great coincidence. Sitting around the campfire, they were already laughing, as if they were good friends. The guy who seems to be the leader of the group explains that they were wondering how they would cross the sacred plains to reach Karta as well, and finally introduces himself as a group of merchants, saying that his name was Volund. While Leon introduces himself as a former guard of Asseldorf, he introduces himself as Noah Burke. His last name indicated that he probably had an unknown origin. Then Volund asks if he was an orphan or a bastard, but Leon denies it. While they talked, Veronica was shivering from the cold. A man nearby, noticing this, offers her a drink with a bit of alcohol to help warm her up. She was already thanking him when Leon stopped her, grabbing the protagonist, saying that his wife didn't drink, and leaving all the guys there feeling awkward. Volund soon bursts out laughing, saying that this guy is head over heels for his wife. The blonde explains that the city of his origin commonly offered a drink to guests, and he wanted her to at least take a sip to be respectful. Leon says he was familiar with this custom and knew that one person could represent an entire family, so he would drink on behalf of his wife as well, being embraced by Volund, who calls him jealous. But Leon explains that they were newlyweds. That's why he acted this way. However, Veronica knew that there was nothing jealous coming from him. It wasn't long before they retired to their tents. Leon's head hurt, and he knew they had put something in that damn drink. Meanwhile, he watched Veronica sleeping peacefully, wondering what they should do. Maybe it would be good to grab their luggage and leave. But on the other hand, they could gather more information. The girl settled in Leon's lap, who was still watching her. He looked quite cute like that, but I'm still wary of this romance. When he notices a small movement outside and decides to check, saying he would be back quickly. In the middle of the forest, someone catches up with him, commenting that it was impressive, that he was still standing after that drink. It was Volund, with an axe in hand as if he were also doing his own patrol. Smiling, Leon explains that he just needed to relieve himself a bit and didn't know that in the guy's town a man had to ask for permission for that. But Volund explains that it depended on who it was, explaining that, for example, they wouldn't let someone capable of taking out several people alone move a finger without permission. In this case, permission from the entire group that soon appears behind him with their own weapons. Leon knew he shouldn't have left Veronica alone, so he needed to end this quickly. However, it was too late since someone had just entered the tent. Covering her mouth, one of the guys tells her to be quiet and claims that if she made a sound, he would finish her off. In the middle of the forest, the redhead was fighting for his life, and he had already taken out some of the guys Volund asked while they fought if there was any time to worry about his wife. But he smiled, saying it was hard to put his wife to sleep. So it was his men who should have taken care of waking her up, and then he hits the guy from inside the tent. The blonde asks Veronica if the man outside was Leon Burke. After all, he had all the traits of the story. And he couldn't believe that this guy had brought a woman to that place, which only showed that the Holy Knights were all crazy. Commenting that his hometown had been destroyed by the Bahamut, yet these guys were completely oblivious to the world. The guy comments that the citizens of that village said they didn't need to worry, because God would protect them while they hid all the information about those monsters. Pressing Veronica to the ground, he says it was time for the two of them to have some fun, commenting that it wasn't his fault that that lunatic Burke brought an ideal woman for him, making Veronica cry with his movements. But the girl tried to calm down, knowing that Leon wouldn't abandon her so easily. But it would already be too late by the time he arrived. That's why she pulls out her gift, tired of waiting for this salvation. And then she drives the blade into the blonde. In fact, when Leon arrives at the tent, it would have already been too late if it weren't for Veronica, who is sitting huddled while the blonde is lying on the ground. As soon as she sees Leon, she asks if he knew from the beginning that those guys weren't just random merchants. Leon prefers not to answer, and she explains that normally merchants hired mercenaries for protection instead of using weapons themselves. Finally, she asks if it was because of the chaos that the world had been in lately that people like them appeared. But Leon explains that people don't change so easily. She was surprised by the answer. And the redhead explains that no matter how bad the world gets, the bad people always do even worse things. The protagonist suddenly strokes Leon's hair, asking why he didn't wear a helmet with so many evil people around. Then he states that first, because that way he would have a quick end, and second, because he didn't like having anything stuck on his head. Jokingly, he asks her to tell him what the correct reason was, and she, shocked, says that the two of them didn't make sense. Taking advantage of the mood for questions, Veronica asks why he gifted her the dagger. And the guy says that when there's a robber in the house, even a child can grab a kitchen knife. In reality, what she would like to know is if she had the ability to kill Bahamut? After all, she wasn't completely oblivious, since when she took out the blonde who was on top of her, she felt a change in the atmosphere. Perhaps after being corrupted, she had gained some power she didn't know about. Because if that was the case for giving her that dagger because of this ability, she would like to learn how to use it properly. Since she wanted to become stronger, Leon thinks that the bird that broke the egg wasn't a dodo bird that gave up its wings, but a hawk capable of facing the harsh winter. Realizing the reason he always thought she resembled something, even so, that didn't mean she was mentally prepared, since someone who isn't shaken by seeing someone like that in front of them is a person who lacks something. A person with a defect in some of their emotional skills. Leon stands up, saying that since they had nothing to lose, he could try to teach her. Before leaving, he says that she shouldn't complain if the time came and she thought she wasn't ready, because he didn't like those who gave up halfway. But the ironic one asks him not to worry, because she was tougher than she looked. During her training, she dragged the blade, thinking it would have been heavier. Then Leon says that if she doesn't find it heavy, she should do everything while carrying the sword, even take a shower and sleep. But the girl retorts that he should teach her how to use it. Especially if she was in danger, Leon comments that she wouldn't be able to do anything with the blade, to which she responds that it wasn't that heavy. When he tells her to keep carrying it, it irritates her. In fact, she continued carrying it until she tried to strike at the air, generating an unusual wind, which caught Leon's attention. She asks if he saw that, because she felt as if she had actually cut the air in half, but she thought it was all very amazing. Struggling to keep the sword up, Veronica was impressed that she managed to do it so easily. So she kept trying, but nothing else happened, a bit disappointed, as she hadn't really felt anything the first time. She asks him why it hadn't worked, and he says he didn't know after all. He hadn't been corrupted like she had. His comment makes the girl sad, but she insists that he answer her seriously at least once. And Leon explains that now he only had a small piece of advice to give, that she should strengthen herself physically. That was all she could do at the moment. As he took her hand to help her up onto the horse, the protagonist felt a bit disappointed, as he had said he would teach her. He easily pulls her onto his lap on the horse. He adds that as obvious as it may seem, muscle strength is crucial for using a sword. The girl says she used to dance, so she was stronger than she looked. When he says he had noticed that, she is surprised and questions if it's because she was skinny. He says no, but ends up not completing the sentence, as he soon remembers something from his childhood. In fact, he remembered his mother, an incredible dancer to say the least. But he wouldn't say that to her. Changing the subject, he comments that she had muscles, even though she didn't eat much. Veronica boasts that she was very confident when it came to physical challenges, while he jokes with her that really, it must have been why she fell down the stairs. Embarrassed, she replies that she was very good considering the circumstances. Leon grabs her hair at the nape and says that her hair was quite short for a dancer, and she comments that her father said long hair was very vulgar, so that's why she had cut it herself, which Leon thought was a shame, and he ended up remembering his mother's long hair, which we'll say is a bit strange, but I'll try to think that he thought her hair was beautiful, and that's it. They continued their journey while Leon teased her about her hair. As the sun set, they approached the sacred place. Veronica is perplexed to see the place she had only heard about. Upon entering, she comments that she had heard some rumors about the statue in front of her, but she was shocked that it really didn't have a head, wondering if 20 years ago the statue was really complete. But the guy asks how old she thought he was to know that. She takes the opportunity to ask his age, to which he replies that he wasn't old enough to be there 20 years ago. Veronica questions him if that was true because he always treated her like a child, as if he were much older. He jokingly asks if she didn't like being treated like one, something Veronica confirms, responding that it was because she wanted him to like her. Seeing her serious and sincere expression, Leon asks why she wanted him to like her so much, and the protagonist confesses that she didn't exactly know, but since she was little, she had always wished for people to like her, since those who were loved always seemed happier. It was precisely for that reason that she learned to dance, so that everyone would look at her and admire her. Leon, hearing this, simply replies that he would also like that, which leaves the protagonist confused. And he adds that he would also like her to like him enough to completely lose herself in him, which makes the protagonist realize that the way he sought attention reminded her of herself. But that guy didn't seem lonely. Veronica comments that the rumors about him were true. While holding his face, Leon asks which rumors she is referring to, about him abandoning his comrades on the battlefield or abandoning God to become obsessed with women. The girl pushes him away, saying that she had heard rumors about him having a bastard child somewhere. Turning his back to her, Leon says he had no intention of being with a woman. He hadn't before, didn't now, and wouldn't in the future. Oh, come on, Leon. The way you say it makes it hard to believe, you know. Veronica asks if he would maintain that even if he fell in love, which he confirms, saying he wouldn't be foolish enough to fall in love with someone in the first place. It was strange to see so much devotion in just one person, as if his life couldn't have anything beyond the divine. Of course, Veronica had already noticed this in the short time they had been together, but that didn't mean she liked that he was like that. Insisting on the subject, she asks how the guy was so sure that he wouldn't fall in love. After all, true love was sudden. And she comments that sometimes just facing another person was enough. To be so in love that they would give up everything for that person. Some even became desperate just to find true love. So he shouldn't say that he is so sure. Changing her expression, the girl says that there were many things to happen in his life. He takes her arm while replying that an overwhelming passion consumes everything in an instant. Pulls her close. That's why some people, even looking into another's eyes like that, pretend not to notice and let the love of their life pass by, since it's better this way than to lose everything they have already conquered. Veronica is surprised by his sudden movement and his words. The guy asks her to rest while he goes to get the things. Outside, Leon did not feel well at all, and he remembered when he heard a speech from one of his superiors about how God placed his expectations on humanity and chose some specific humans to receive divine power. And that's why when someone with that power spent too much time in the plains, that power was gradually drained, probably trying to return to its own origins. Leon felt he was at his limit. It was then that he heard someone calling him Vice Commander. Looking over, he saw some ghosts. It was as if his colleagues he had abandoned were right there beside him. On the front line a year ago, the men were desperately shouting for the Vice Commander, as they needed to retreat, saying they needed to return to Karta. But Leon didn't respond and just walked towards him with a vacant look. His sword suddenly began to shine, and all the other knights went on high alert, until one of them shouted for everyone to duck and protect themselves, as the sword was out of control. However, they couldn't be quick enough, and only a huge flash was able to eliminate everyone around him in an instant. Kneeling on the ground, Leon couldn't believe what had happened. There were many rumors that the object consumed the divine power of the other sacred knights who were with him. But even so, Leon was unable to stop the monster. People questioned why he didn't follow orders and return to the city, commenting that he must have lost his mind. His vision was blurry, and memories were confused with what was happening when Veronica was calling his name, asking if he was okay. The young man gazes deeply at her, not knowing what to say. When he regained his consciousness, the protagonist was worried, wanting to know if he was really okay. Placing her hand on the young man's forehead, she noticed he was burning with fever, and she asks how long he had been feeling this way, lamenting not having noticed the strangeness of the guy since they arrived. Leon staggers and rests his head on Veronica, saying that he just needed to rest a little, that he would be able to get better. Even feeling unwell, he couldn't help but notice how easy it was to provoke these reactions in her, which he ended up not being able to resist. As he begins to doze off, he wonders how it would be if he had met her when he was still a knight. He would probably tease her until she cried, and when that happened, he would apologize and find a way to make her smile, or something like that, so they could be together. But under the current circumstances, it was better not to expect that kind of thing. After a while sleeping on Veronica's shoulder, she notices that his temperature has normalized a bit, and asks if he is awake, which makes Leon open his tired eyes. She comments that she was thinking there, how he looked like a cat. The chatty girl comments that he did whatever he wanted and had a terrible temper, but even so, when he got close to her, she couldn't send him away. He gives a little chuckle, commenting that he had never been called a cat before. She makes a point of clarifying that it was a compliment and that she really liked cats. In fact, when she was younger, a stray cat would follow her in front of her house, and she would feed it sometimes because she couldn't take it in. Until one day the creature entered her house and she realized she wouldn't be able to control such a free creature. Leon asks if she gave a name to the kitten, to which she replies that of course she did. He says that then the blame was hers, because the moment she named the cat, he believed it was a house cat. This reminds her of the talk about him not naming the horse earlier. Veronica says that now she understands, while she thinks sadly that maybe that's why he hasn't asked her name until today. Seeing that she became disheartened, Leon pulls her closer, with the excuse that it was cold and so they should stay close. He knew she was so innocent that she accepted the kindness without hesitation. When the main Bahamut was killed, all who came from it ended up dying too. Since the corrupted humans were also part of the descendants of Bahamut, as soon as the original was killed, her life would end too. Like a camellia flower falling whole from the branch, in full bloom, unaware of its impending death. The two ended up sleeping in that place. While Veronica began to have the visions again in her dream, She was in a completely frozen place and found something resembling a mushroom that she had never seen before, but she didn't really know where she was or where she was going. It was then that she saw something frightening. Gradually, the white ground was consumed by red bubbles, and as they burst, creatures were born. Several Bahamuts appeared like that on the mountain looking in her direction. It was then that she woke up with a scream and shortness of breath. Desperate, she searched for Leon, who was still sleeping, but that aroma of a human beside her was irresistible. She felt somewhat humiliated for being so attached to him, and every time she had those visions. However, to escape that pain and madness, she would do anything, and so she leaned closer to his lips. Leon woke up also not seeming to be very well in that place, asking if she had had another vision. This made Veronica hesitate for a moment, embarrassed by her actions. He stretched his arms and pulled her close, saying that everything would be all right. The protagonist could only feel the guilt of desiring one of God's children inside the Great Temple, and while kissing Leon, she wondered if the devil had really corrupted her soul. Did I mention that I love this way of diminishing the curse? But I'm afraid of the direction the story is going, but let's continue. With the dawn of the day, the two were talking about the mushroom she said she had seen, and the guy explains that it only grew in the mountains surrounding the city of Carta. Veronica asks if it was possible for the monsters to have come close and not attacked until now, but she realizes that she might know the answer. It was the sacred city, a city protected by the divine power of the knights for thousands of years. The oracle was clear in saying that the city would remain at peace forever, without even a drop of blood being shed on the ground. Then Leon explains that even if the world ended, that city would not fall because it was God's promise. With that, Veronica takes the opportunity to ask if he really believed that God existed. He says he is sure that he exists. Smiling, the protagonist comments that her answer was expected from God's children, and that it would be strange if he denied it since he had divine power. The girl still asks how Leon knew he had that power, because it must have been nice to live a life of salvation from the beginning. According to her, the guy beside her must have received a lot of attention and affection while growing up. However, Leon only responds that it was when he regained the vision in his eye that it was early. He comments that he had been completely blind in one eye and suddenly, one night, he could see again. When he was a child, the woman who claimed to be his mother cut his eye with a knife, because according to her, he needed to look more like God. Veronica interrupts the story, outraged that someone would do that to their own child. If she wanted a face that resembled God, she should have done that to herself. The guy stands up, shrugging, suggesting that maybe she didn't want to go blind because she was already blind with love. In reality, she just wanted the attention of his biological father, and thought that a holy knight would care for a child who resembled God. This remark makes Veronica remember the conversation they had about most knights not maintaining celibacy, and maybe at that moment, that's why he said he also felt repulsed by the vulgar knights. The protagonist questions if at least his mother got what she wanted in the end, but Leon asks her to analyze the situation herself, asking what she thinks happened after that. According to the guy, as his mother wanted, his biological father became interested in him. Of course, in reality, he was not interested in him as his son, but in his power, and decided to take him. Veronica says she couldn't understand. Leon asks if it was about his biological mother. She says no. She couldn't understand him how he spoke about all this as if it were easy, even though he was being hurt by his family. And whatever he was feeling, he shouldn't ignore those feelings. Of course, ignoring them would give a sense of temporary relief, but in the future, it would only lead to two consequences. Either he would become insensitive to sadness and lose his humanity, or the sadness he thought he had ignored would return and end everything. But Leon argues that a third option would be that everything would feel somewhat meaningless. And for him, everything was like that, dull and meaningless. Strangely funny that in the past, as a child, he had to deal with many things that a child shouldn't, just to get a bit of love from his mother. But now, he couldn't even remember the face of the woman who raised him. At 7, he began serving the knights in the Pope's palace. At 13, he became a squire. And when he knelt before the Pope, he was only 19. He truly believed he was a child of the divine. The emotions that Veronica referred to were not simply ignored from her chest. They had simply passed. Noticing the girl's gaze, he asks why it seemed like she was about to cry. Veronica said she wasn't crying. She just had a terrible habit of tearing up. However, it was very obvious that she was trying to hold back her tears, and Leon points that out. The protagonist explains that it's because she cried a lot when she was a child. She would run around screaming and kicking the air, and Leon asks why she changed, to which she replies that she didn't know. But in reality, it was because of the times her father told her to stop with those fake tears and to stop trying to appear like a fragile creature. She jokes, saying that only the noisy cicadas could be caught. The girl continues explaining that the tears she had to swallow remained inside her and eventually overflowed and reached her eyes. And one day she would have no other choice but to cry forever. Just as if the boy continued pretending he wasn't sad, he would have no other choice but to sink into depression. To him, that made sense. Facing the man in front of her made her remember someone who could cut their own arm to stop an infection. That was probably the real Leon Burke. So, in a subtle act, the girl asks if she can cry for him by touching his face. For a moment of compassion, Leon holds her hand without saying anything. And soon after, he leans in, his lips pressed violently against hers as if to devour all the sympathy she had for him. The violent yet gentle heat of the moment made her forget for a moment that all of this was done merely out of necessity. Changing the subject, he says, they shouldn't waste their precious divine power. Yet still leaning in, he makes a gesture as if to kiss her. But he kisses Veronica's neck, feeling something warm in his body as if it would take his breath away. Murmuring in her neck, he says a few phrases in a language Veronica doesn't understand, questioning himself how he, who had made a pact with his eyes, could desire a woman like her. Perhaps it had been a premonition of what was to come. Some time passed until the two arrived in the city present in the girl's vision. However, outside, one of the gatekeepers stated that the entrance to the city was temporarily closed for security reasons, asking everyone to calm down as they would open the gates again as soon as the situation was resolved. Leon, showing a golden ring, says he would like to sell this ring to get through. The jewel bore the insignia of the Order of the Sacred Knights. Upon noticing the symbol, the guard was shocked, and examining the man more closely, he noticed the sacred sword, while Leon said he needed to deliver something to His Holiness, asking to be allowed to cross the gates. For some reason, that worked perfectly. Making small talk with the knight escorting them, Leon says he hadn't seen him in a long time, calling him by name, Oscar Burke. In fact, he used to be Lewis's squire about 5 years ago. With a rather unfriendly air, Oscar says he didn't expect Leon to remember him because he claims he became an official knight 4 years ago. The two stare at each other with immense tension. Addressing Veronica, Oscar says he will take her to the papal palace, but she clings to Leon, asking if they weren't already there. And the boy says the palace was behind the cathedral, but Leon would meet her after the audience with the Pope Leon. Without even looking at the protagonist, releases his arm from her hands and walks away, leaving her with Oscar. She calls out to him, but without saying his name, which he ignores, and Veronica feels anxious, as she didn't know how she could call him in that place. Oscar tells the girl to follow him. While walking in the other direction, she thinks that the next time they see each other, they should agree on how she could call him inside the palace. The Pope says that Leon returned much earlier than he thought he would, and Julia says it hasn't been long since he received his letter about finding a corrupted person. My God, I can't believe Leon delivered her to the church. Oh no, I don't like this kneeling. The knight says that a day after sending the message, the city of Asseldorf was invaded, and he had to leave immediately. Shocking the Pope, he couldn't believe that Leon dared to cross the sacred plains, giving a sermon to the young man for breaking many rules since he disowned his battalion. Speaking in the sacred tongue, Leon says, "Father, I have sinned against paradise, and before you, I am no longer worthy to be called your son." However, he still says that his second son had returned to the holy city. Even so, the man receives him with hostility, asking if he expected a celebration banquet, or what Leon says he would prefer a banquet where they killed Bahamut instead of a bull. The Pope questions what he means by that. He explains that the woman he brought had a vision of Bahamut in the mountains around, indicating that they were multiplying in the Brassen Mountains to attack Karta. The information surprises the Pope. Leon explains that the girl also foresaw the invasion of Asseldorf, so they should check the mountains immediately. Philip, who was with him, tells the Pope that half of the knights were sent to the city of Belwyn and had not yet returned. So for now, it was impossible to go to the mountains. But Leon argues that God promised eternal peace to the city where they were. Even so, the blonde insists that the number of monsters was only growing and that it would end the city. Before Philip could finish his sentence, Leon interrupts him, asking if he had ever considered that God sent that woman precisely to ensure that the city would not fall. The Pope ponders for a moment and asks if that is why Leon had breathed life into Bahamut's daughter, warning that the use of divine power for healing was forbidden precisely to prevent the knights from falling into the trap of pleasure and lust. But Leon says he only did what was necessary. The Pope approaches, questioning what Leon said. Just like the Pope, I also suspect the use of words here. Necessary, right? The Pope questions if it was necessary, would Leon sacrifice the girl on the altar? Meanwhile, the girl arrives in her room and questions if she would really stay there. Since there were many rooms in the palace, and instead of placing her in one of them, she was locked in the basement. At the same time, she hears screams and people begging to be spared. Even so, one of the subordinates says they would bring food to her door when it was mealtime, but in the meantime, she should rest, leaving her alone there. As night fell, Leon was being followed by Oscar, who chattered that the purpose of that expedition was to find traces of Bahamut, as some knights had disappeared in recent days, and they needed to take a look at the areas they were patrolling. Stressed, Leon asks why he had been following him all day, to which Oscar explains that the Pope ordered him to assist Leon, and warns that this would only be in the Holy City, but he would not follow him during the expedition. This makes Leon comment that the Pope must like him a lot to not send him to truly dangerous places. And the young man says he should not make assumptions about his superior. As he was just a loyal servant, Leon could feel strong emotions coming from the young man, especially the resentment for having broken the pact, besides the need for recognition from the bastards around and the preparation to dedicate his life to that. It was ridiculous how weak humans were to the point of not being able to live without dedicating themselves to something, be it dreams, family, money, or honor. Oscar opens the door to Veronica's cell. They can only see a pile under the sheets. Leon approaches the bed, and when he goes to pull the sheet, Veronica jumps out of bed with her dagger in hand, ready to attack. Until she notices it was Leon. Embarrassed, she apologizes, as she did not know it was him. And Oscar asks why the corrupted girl had a weapon, to which Leon responds that he was the one who gave it to her. When reprimanded for his name, Leon asks if he didn't think his name sounded a bit strange. Explaining that is why he was avoiding saying Oscar's full name too, since now they both had the same surname. He turns to Veronica, who is quite embarrassed and confused, and asks Oscar to wait outside as it would take some time for the two to talk. The protagonist comments that he took a long time to come find her. Leon says he had a lot to resolve and much to explain since they crossed the sacred plains. Being honest, she says she thought he wouldn't come. When asking why she said that, she replies that it was because she thought he was angry about what happened there on the plains. For her, things were a bit strange, and when they separated earlier, she didn't even look back. Leon places his hand on her head, surprising her, but he takes one of the feathers from her hair, asking what reason he would have to be angry with her. Veronica says she ended up seeing through his mask. Normally, people who protected themselves with masks were afraid of being discovered, and she questions whether he crossed the line in the plains, but he quickly cuts her off, saying no. And he says he wasn't angry. Perhaps the right word would be that he was even grateful, since no one had ever cried for him before. Veronica tries her best not to fall for his charm and good looks, and then she questions why he locked her in this place. Leon explains that it wasn't a prison, it was just protection, because the papacy determined that this was the safest place for her. Even so, the girl retorts that he says it's for her own good, but they won't stay there together. Then Leon warns that he will have to go to the mountains, so he couldn't take her on that expedition. He approaches her, holding her neck, and he says that before that, he had to take care of one thing. At that moment, Veronica understood that the man was not there to rescue her from that place, but rather to do what he needed to do. So she pushes him away. Oh, guys, I'm starting to feel sorry for her. They are both in love, but he just complicates things. She says that until then, those visions came when corruption was out of control. And that's why she thought the man wanted her to have more visions and probably brought her there for that reason. Leon confesses that he had also noticed that, but orders were orders as he leans in to kiss her. For the first time in a long time, Veronica felt sorry for herself. She who depended entirely on another person to survive. Because of that, she couldn't even refuse the kiss, even knowing that for him it was just an order that had to be fulfilled. But she knew that when that moment ended, she would be alone again. Leon turns to leave, but Veronica grabs his arm before he can pull away, thinking she would fall into deep loneliness as soon as that ended. And with pain in her voice, she asks him not to go, not to leave her, and she asks if they couldn't just stay together for that day. While looking at her, Leon thinks that he had heard some scholars say that time passed differently in the plains, so perhaps they had spent decades together, growing closer as they tried to warm up in each other's heat, or perhaps that time together had never happened, and he was just letting himself be carried away again, seeing that she wouldn't give in. Leon comments that the bed was too small for both of them, to which Veronica replies that they didn't need to sleep together, just to be with her during the day. In reality, she just didn't want him to abandon her in that place. Leon tries to comfort her, saying that he wasn't abandoning her, but at the same time he remembers the conversation he had with the Pope. when he asked about perhaps having to sacrifice the girl on the altar, to which he simply replied that the Pope should do what he thought was right. He strokes Veronica's hair, assuring her that next time he would take her with him. But until then, she had to stay there. The protagonist knew they were just lies, but even if they were lies, they were kind, which made her even more irritated. Even with this back and forth, the girl concludes that he would leave her alone that day, so she grabs the wine they had there and spills it on Leon's clothes, pretending it was just an accident and that he would have to find other clothes. And for that, he would have to soak those and sleep, to wait for them to dry. She hands him a cloth to clean himself while smiling. Leon, noticing the hostility in her words, says that in fact, she was the one who was angry with him. After taking a shower, Leon remembers Veronica's words in the plains. It was surprising how this woman managed to touch his most vulnerable point and break down that whole world he had painfully built to protect the boy who trembled with fear. And perhaps he had known from the beginning that he would feel something in his heart for her, but he was being consumed by guilt and betrayal, as if he were about to suffocate at any moment. I'll be honest, I got confused at this part. Was he suffering from pain or pleasure? I'll leave that moment to your imagination. Inside the bathroom, Leon knew he was completely lost, while Veronica waited for him outside, sitting at the table. Already dressed, the girl asks if before going out on the expedition, he could teach her to use the sword, because she didn't have much time to wait for her to get strong enough. But before she finished her sentence, Leon stands up, telling her to grab the sword he was carrying. With the girl in position, the former knight explains that the grip wasn't fixed and depended on how she intended to use the blade, and then he gives some more technical explanations that leave Veronica quite confused, and confesses that listening to his explanations still left her somewhat lost on what to do. So he holds her from behind and tries to explain more practically, explaining that the front part should face the enemy, while the back part should face her, and raises his hand explaining that he would only use the front part for enemies that were distant. Making the movement to teach her, he adds that if Bahamut was right in front of her, it didn't matter which side of the sword, she just had to aim for his heart. Leon lets go of Veronica, telling her to try to do it on her own. After trying on her own, she is amazed by her skill, asking Leon what he thought of her abilities. He just stared at her while admiring her beauty. In this windowless place where she couldn't even tell if it was day or night, with the fire in the fireplace crackling to the sound of the sword cutting through the air, and the girl confesses that it was more fun than it seemed. Meanwhile, he thought that our memory holds the stories of what we really see, but he believed he would remember that moment for a long time. Sometime later, the girl had fallen asleep without even remembering how. And upon waking, she realized that Leon had left without even saying goodbye, until she hears someone say that if she tried to refuse to eat, she would be punished. It was Oscar saying that even if she had to force herself, she had to eat something, and she says she wasn't refusing, as she had just woken up. But the guy says that the people who were taking care of her didn't know that Veronica asks if he was sent there to fight with her. Oscar explains that he was there protecting her at Leon's request, and with the Pope's approval. Then the girl jabs at him, asking if even someone imprisoned needed a guard. Approaching Oscar, she says that since they would see each other for a while, she should introduce herself, saying she was Veronica Schwarzwald. Not accepting the handshake, he makes a small bow saying his name was Oscar Burke. She excitedly asks the knight to take a look at her stance with the sword, explaining that she learned how to hold the sword the day before, so she still felt a bit awkward. This catches Oscar by surprise. He questions if Leon taught her the knight's stances, to which Veronica replies that it was just the basics. Unconvinced, he doesn't understand why she learned this being a woman who didn't even believe in God. Offended, Veronica says that she was indeed a woman, but she did believe in God, saying that she always went to church with her father, but couldn't finish speaking, as Oscar interrupts, asserting that she was not faithful to God because someone with faith would not carry those eyes. True believers were not corrupted by madness, asserting that she was nothing more than a monster who sold her faith to the devil. And he makes a point of saying that if it weren't for Leon, she would have to face the Inquisition. Oscar doesn't stop, commenting that if she were truly faithful, Bahamut would have killed her and not taken her as his child. Noticing Veronica's silence, he questions if he was wrong. Irritated and upset by his words, Veronica says that according to his logic, Bahamut was better at discerning others' faith than the Inquisitors. And if that were the case, the monster should conduct the Papal Inquisition. Oscar shouts back, telling her not to speak blasphemy. But the girl doesn't back down, saying that he was the one who started this. The tension is clear already on the first day. The protagonist, irritated, thinks that she never knew there would come a day when she would prefer Leon Burke over someone else. A few days later, she was already getting bored of being there, and she couldn't stand seeing Oscar's face anymore. Honestly, and upon simply making eye contact, the two were still irritated by the warm-ups from a few days ago. However, Veronica was determined to change that, since there was no way around it and she needed to coexist with him there. Before she could do anything, someone knocks on the door of the room. It was the Pope, and his commander Mecklenburg. Veronica knew that name very well. All the children grew up hearing stories about how he rescued princesses and did incredible things, of course. They didn't know how much of the tales were true, but the man became a knight at 15 years old, and was a legend at 50. She bows to reverence him, but the guy tells her to get up looking at him. Something becomes more than clear. She remembers Leon's words about his mother wanting his father's attention, and there he was right in front of her. He was clearly Leon's father, giving only a quick glance at Veronica. He confirms with the Pope that the girl had been corrupted, but was different from the others. The Pope explains that they were informed that the girl was corrupted by the first existing Bahamut, and he asks if she had any different traits, but the guy couldn't identify any. No other being managed to maintain sanity like she did. But it was probably the result of the divine power that sustained her. When asked about the girl's age, she replies that she was 20 years old. The Pope suggests that the girl's mother probably went to the sacred plains while she was still pregnant. This surprises the girl. The Pope asks if she knew what kind of people could be corrupted, to which the girl responds that they had said only people without faith. But the Pope explains that it wasn't quite like that, because in recent years they had seen many corrupted people, and one of them was a pope, a priest, who had a devotion that surprised even the papacy, and an elderly lady with dementia who only lived on prayers. However, they noticed that all the corrupted had one thing in common, which made her very curious. Meanwhile, Leon was in the mountains on his expedition. He couldn't help but remember Veronica, pleading for him not to go, and her tearful face, which reminded him of when he was a child, pleading for his mother to do the same, running after her like a fool, convinced that women meant nothing to him, still trying to convince himself that she was just a person who needed to die to save 400 million lives. In fact, if their paths hadn't crossed, he would have already left. And if he continued to fear hurting her, he wouldn't have done even half of what he did. Back in the girl's room, she was becoming increasingly confused about the common trait among the corrupted. Then the Pope resumes the story about how 20 years ago they found the statue inside the Great Headless Temple. The first to see it were pilgrims who visited the plains in the summer, including the Pope himself, who was among them, and his memory of that day was very vivid. The Pope stopped receiving divine prophecies the moment that statue lost its head, as if God had died. All that talk was very strange. Why would Veronica's mother have embarked on a pilgrimage while she was pregnant? The Pope asks if she now understood why he had come to meet her. He wanted to know why those who saw the statue before everyone else were spared. He wanted to open their heads and read their thoughts, but the corrupted always died very quickly before they could say anything. It was then that our girl realized that the guy was afraid of becoming corrupted someday. Leon's father approaches the girl quickly, as if he had planned everything they would do upon entering the room, and he grabs her by the neck, which makes Veronica ask what was happening. Suddenly, the divine power that Leon had left in reserve with her starts to flow through the guy's hands. She didn't even know that this power could be stolen, but she didn't want to become a monster, and that's why she fought. She remembered when she first met Leon, and he asked if the girl would like to continue living even if it meant going through hell, but she didn't want to lose her consciousness. And even Oscar asked them to wait, but Leon's father doesn't listen, until he knocks the girl to the ground, telling the Pope to step back, everyone anxiously waiting to see what would happen to her now that she was without divine power. The thirst in her mouth returned, but as if possessed, she begins to say, "A small sword will be taken, and using the sacred sword, Bahamut will destroy Karta." Oscar wonders if this would be a prophecy. She continues saying that prayers and cries would not be heard or seen by God, because even he lost his face. Then the girl passes out, leaving everyone perplexed by what they had just seen and heard. The Pope is extremely indignant, shouting for the guys to do something. They should lock this cursed girl in the torture chamber for not being of any help. When Veronica wakes up, she is already in different clothes and locked up. She didn't even know how she was alive after being without Leon's divine power. The door opens, and Leon's father and Oscar realize that she is still alive. He says he already knew she saw things when she wasn't under divine blessing, so he needed to know all the visions she had since they locked her in there. With his silence, he asks if the protagonist was refusing to speak, and he snaps his fingers, making Oscar approach her. Veronica, confused by everything and afraid of what might happen, is left speechless. Oscar throws her against the wall and tells her to tell the commander what she saw. Veronica, indignant, says she didn't understand what they wanted from her, as even if she spoke, the visions would not set her free. She comments that Leon told her she would stay there because she would be safe. He hadn't left her in the palace to be treated that way, and probably wouldn't want to know about it when he returned. Totally ignoring her outburst, the commander asks about the prophecy she had made earlier. But even as he recounts what happened, Veronica does not remember having said that. And the guy says that even if only 3 people had heard it, it was indeed a prophecy. And anyone who was alive when the statue lost its head would recognize it. He knew there were only 2 sacred swords in the whole world, the twin swords Genesis and Apocalypse. One was with him, and the other was in the mountains with Leon. The man reveals that the sword should have already returned with its master, but that hadn't happened until then, leaving her desperate. The girl grabs him, asking if Leon was okay. Firmly, he asks again what the visions showed her. Desperate about Leon's disappearance, Veronica says the visions revealed nothing important. They are just an endless cycle devouring humans and reproducing. Before she can ask about Leon again, another soldier appears at the door. The girl insists on the subject, asking how he wouldn't send anyone after Leon even after hearing that prophecy. Because if she was right, he should be rescued immediately. But all the guy says is that apparently the girl didn't know Leon very well, because he could disappear without a trace. But he wouldn't die so easily. In fact, he was someone who would sacrifice his own companions to survive in a battle against death. Before leaving, he tells Oscar to make sure the girl would be alive when he returned. The protagonist couldn't understand how her own father was turning his back on his son. A few days later, Veronica had already lost her patience. When the door opened, her face lit up with the idea of it being Leon, but it was just Oscar bringing water. The girl withdraws, but thanks him nonetheless. She asks if Leon had returned yet. The girl insists on the question, and Oscar thinks for a moment before saying that he hasn't come back. In reality, he had only come there because Mecklenburg asked him to keep her alive. Veronica sarcastically says he was very kind and questions if he only wanted that to torment her again when he recovered. But Oscar explains that the commander went to the mountains and would take a while to return. That awakens something in the protagonist, who asks when he left and if he was looking for Leon. But Oscar doesn't answer, and just says that from now on he will visit to deliver her meals and asks her to share her visions. But before he leaves, the girl grabs him, asking why Mecklenburg went to the mountains. He reprimands her for the way she spoke about the commander. But the girl only cares about the fact that the man might have gone after his own son. However, Oscar cuts her off, telling her not to confuse things, because the commander only went because it was his duty to protect the sacred sword. Veronica questions if the sword was not just a symbol. Oscar explains that they were not just swords, but sacred swords, since both Genesis of Mecklenburg and Apocalypse of Leon were capable of absorbing divine power, thus being able to absorb all the divine power from the barriers that protected the city. In fact, when Leon was fighting years ago, something had happened, but Oscar keeps that a secret, and he changes the subject, saying that the commander would not mobilize his subordinates just for Leon. Veronica even thought about asking if he wouldn't do that for his own son, but the question had already been answered in her mind. Although she was sure that the other knights speculated the same thing when they saw that red-haired commander. The fact that the rumor hadn't spread meant that either she was very wrong about her father's true identity, or the red-haired man was treated so poorly that no one ever believed he could be Mecklenburg's son. Oscar stares at her in silence, for a while, before leaving. Time passed in that room, and Veronica wondered if Leon could be feeling as lonely as she was. As several days had passed, she believed he would have already died. But as the days went by, her thirst seemed to be improving and the corruption more tolerable. She wondered how that was possible without receiving any divine power. And now she occupied herself questioning what made her so different from other people to keep her alive. She even thought she was becoming Bahamut. One of those nights, she woke up surrounded by the glacier in yet another illusion, surrounded by the gazes of the other monsters. The girl tries to stay strong and remember that this wasn't really happening. It was just another illusion and she needed to calm down, as she wasn't in that place, surrounded by Bahamuts. It was then that she heard the sound of a horn, wondering where it could have come from. It was the knights warning of an enemy attack, more specifically from the Bahamuts, telling everyone to stay alert and reform their positions. The monsters were fast and reached them in a leap, but their captain was quick to say that everyone should attack and that they couldn't retreat. For on that day they would become the heroes of Karda. Among them was Leon, watching the original Bahamut, with its head intact. He pulls out the sacred sword and the monster stares at him hungrily. Desperate, Veronica screams for the monster not to attack him, and at that moment it was as if the creature could hear her. Leon notices a slight retreat from the creature, and gets irritated thinking that the creature was trying to escape. Before he can run after the original, Leon realizes that his soldiers are being attacked. Their captain had been captured and the rest needed help. Leon knew that without the captain they would be massacred, but he didn't want to let that monster escape. They didn't know what to do without him. Hesitating a bit, he decides to make a choice and goes back to help the soldiers. He tells the guys to fall back and asserts that God was with them. Thus, the men regain their position, fleeing from there, positioning themselves to attack under Leon's command. As he runs to the battle, he remembers how Veronica questioned if he could save an entire city, because he believed he could. While defeating the monsters, he says that she probably knew the reason he couldn't answer that question. After all, everyone could die because of his decision, exactly like his partners who died a year ago. From atop the mountain, the girl thanked that Leon was safe and watched the men who were perishing there. Meanwhile, she tried to accept that someone like her couldn't make a prophecy, as she was just another one corrupted by the monster. But if she really was, where was that monster in front of her going? When she was up there, she had the impression that she saw Leon's father before turning her back. And for the first time, it seemed she had seen the creature as if it were laughing at the situation. Lying on the floor of the torture room, the girl murmured not to go away. It was then that Oscar entered the room with a whip in hand. Hesitating to do something, the Pope orders him to carry out the education for her. And seeing his trembling hands, questioned if he was hesitating before God. Trying to be stronger in front of the Pope, Oscar decides to follow the order, whipping Veronica's back. With each strike, he remembered the moment he met her for the first time and how the girl introduced herself in a friendly way, even without knowing what fate awaited her. While hitting her, he tried to remember that she was nothing more than a monster who sold her faith to the devil, but for a moment he stopped, unable to do it anymore, while Veronica, still within the illusion, could only say Leon's name, and the Pope, facing his subordinate, confused as to why he had stopped. The boy kneels, asking to be allowed to stop for now, claiming that he could cut her head off, die in battle, or anything else. But if he continued, the girl would die. The Pope looks at him with disgust, saying he was quite disappointed, and then leaves the room with Oscar there on the floor. When Veronica finally wakes up from the trance, Oscar is the one there to help, desperate about what she had seen. She tries to explain what happened, telling that she saw that person, the owner of the other sword, and she had seen that Mecklenburg had been defeated by the monster. The girl was in shock, as perhaps the prophecy about the sword did not refer to Leon, but maybe to the commander, leaving Oscar confused. He asks if she was saying that the monster had already managed to get Genesis, which she confirms, saying that she saw in the vision the creature destroying Mecklenburg and raising the sword high. Veronica was fearful it was her fault, since she screamed in her dream for the creature not to hurt Leon. Maybe that's why the commander became the next target. The girl shakes Oscar, saying she needed to send more people to ensure Leon's return. Oscar asks her to calm down first. However, Veronica was still worried about Leon, until Oscar said that he had already returned. Relieved, she asks if he really came back, and Oscar confirms again. According to the boy, she had been unconscious for 3 days, and in that time, Leon returned safely with his men. Excited, Veronica asks if he had come to see her while she was unconscious, only for the man to explain that Leon did not do that, not even once, what catches her a bit by surprise, and she asks why. Meanwhile, far from the torture room, Philip is still irritated that Leon took that corrupted girl and brought her right to the heart of the sacred city under his nose. Leon tries to pretend he doesn't know what he's talking about, but Philip says he knew that the corrupted girl he handed over to the Pope was the woman he was holding in his arms in Belwyn. He gives a sermon saying that Leon should have dealt with her as soon as he found her. However, the redhead boasts that if it weren't for that, they wouldn't have discovered the whereabouts of the monsters in the mountains. Philip gets angry that his former partner is insisting on the theory about the original Bahamut, saying that it didn't exist. But Oscar interrupts them, calling the vice commander and explaining that the Pope would like his presence. As Mr. Philip leaves, he calls for Leon, explaining that Veronica wanted to see him because she said she would like to talk about her visions in person. It was then that he realized he didn't even know her name. Even after so much time together, he was surprised that even in his absence, that woman remained alive, which meant that someone had given her divine power in some way. Of course, jealousy corrupted Leon's mind, and he could only imagine that Oscar was probably in charge of that. The thought of this being true irritates and disgusts Leon for having this feeling of possession over her. Leon comments that by Oscar's expressions, it was as if he seemed even human, which offends him. And he says he saw no need to see the corrupted girl and only needed to know about the visions. But Oscar had sworn silence to the Pope and couldn't reveal. So Leon just turns his back and says it must be something he didn't need to know anyway, until Oscar comments that it was something about the commander, which makes Leon sigh, saying in case Oscar had forgotten, he was nothing more than a mercenary who was expelled from the Knights, so he should stop trying to pass confidential information to someone who wasn't of the order. Leon also says he heard that the commander still hadn't returned from the mountains, but knowing him, he would probably be back soon. Only Oscar interrupts him before he finishes making a point to inform that Veronica specifically asked for his presence as soon as she woke up, and takes the opportunity to find out if Leon's intentions were to ignore the poor girl. Even realizing that his heart seemed to be hurting and tight, he couldn't believe that this inexplicable feeling of possession was taking over him, which didn't make him any different from a child throwing a tantrum because someone played with his toy. Ignoring these feelings, he questions again if she really looked for him as soon as she woke up, saying that she was probably just thirsty, and that Oscar could take care of that himself, just like he had done in the past few days. Even feeling strange, Leon could only think that he just had to do as he always did. Cutting ties with people is something he has been doing all his life, and as soon as he manages to kill her presence in his heart, things will calm down again. Both for him and for her, Oscar stands there with nothing to say, just watching Leon walk away. When he returned to the torture room, he apologized to Veronica, who didn't quite understand. He explains that the wounds he had on his back were his fault, and that he had to do that while she was sleeping. Seeing that he seemed sincere in his apologies, the girl says it probably wasn't his idea, and asks why he followed orders he didn't agree with. Then the guy explains that a humble person like him couldn't question the Pope's intentions and should just follow them, but he really wondered what the right path was. The girl looks at him with pity, commenting that he had a very firm belief, just like Leon, while she was full of doubts and in reality was afraid of faith for her. This unwavering belief seemed capable of ending everything: love, conscience, and even guilt. None of these things come close to the belief of someone who believes their actions are divinely correct. A person who justified themselves by their convictions could commit atrocities without thinking twice. So she insists that she needed to talk to Leon, and says that if the boy was really sorry, he should bring him here while he stood there without having managed to bring Leon. These words echoed in his head. It was then he noticed another person coming in his direction. It was the one responsible for carrying out the executions there. He asks if there was any prisoner there that needed to be executed, as he hadn't received any orders about it. Then the man explains that the next day, there would indeed be someone to kill. Meanwhile, lying on the floor, Veronica thought she needed to find Leon, to be able to be on the same level as him and repay all the salvation he gave her, because only then would she be able to speak to him with pride, hoping that one day she could speak to him as an equal without fear. But before she could finish her thoughts, a loud noise distracted her. It was Oscar, pulling the girl's arm, telling her to get up. Surprised, she asks where Leon was. Oscar says he won't come. His statement makes the girl's heart stop for a moment, but they didn't have time. The boy tells her to change clothes and hide her face, and gives instructions to let the guy answer for her if they ask anything. The protagonist interrupts him to ask what was really going on, and Oscar explains that Vice Commander Philip sentenced her to death. Outside, they were walking anxiously when Veronica finally decides to ask why he was helping her, since he seemed very devoted and valued his orders above all. Oscar then replies that she still is and is currently just following the commander's orders, because before he left, he instructed him to keep Veronica alive at all costs. She wondered if this was really a strong faith and sense of order, or just personal will. So, a bit shyly, she says that regardless of the reason, she thanked him for saving her life. Oscar takes the opportunity to return her dagger. Seeing the dagger that Leon had given her, she becomes emotional thinking of him and asks if returning it was also part of the orders. And he explains that someone will come looking for her in a few days, but it would be good for her to have the dagger to protect herself for now. Veronica then says she will pray for Oscar as a thank you for his help, and she would ask God to absolve him of any guilt for freeing a condemned person. For her, at that moment, the boy in front of her was more a son of God than any knight she had known. And if that would be enough, as her prayers really grateful for everything. And Oscar feels emotional for sensing that he was truly doing the right thing. A girl interrupts the conversation, calling for Oscar. The woman says he should have knocked on her door to announce his arrival. The couple mentions that Oscar always declines their invitation, but it's probably because he is very busy. And that's why they were surprised when he mentioned someone who needed shelter. Meanwhile, Veronica wondered if they knew nothing about the situation outside the city of Carta, which probably justified the fact that the couple wasn't looking at her with pity. They were just kind and full of sympathy. The atmosphere there was perfect and welcoming, and somehow everything felt like a big lie. The woman realizes she hasn't introduced herself and says her name is Hannah, and takes the opportunity to introduce her husband. Emmett, Veronica does the same, taking the chance to ask how they met Oscar. Hannah explains that he saved their lives, Actually, Emmett's life. Because he had an accident and ended up trapped under a carriage, Oscar was the only one who stopped to help. The woman confesses that she wanted her son to grow up brave like a knight. That he was the only peasant around who could wear that armor. Veronica is shocked by this information and interrupts, saying that there was another knight who also came from a peasant background, and asks if the couple knew that Leon Burke had returned to the city of Carta. Hannah says yes, but she really thought he would never come back because of the incident. This leaves the protagonist curious, as she didn't know what they were talking about. Then reveals that on the day Burke abandoned his comrades in Tehran, he went mad and ended up killing 600 of his comrades with his own hands. Even the papacy decided to keep this somewhat hushed up, as the citizens adored Leon. Veronica gets lost in her thoughts, remembering how she felt a loneliness very similar to his coming from Leon. Even so, he always showed himself to be strong, using that mask to hide his true feelings. And that's why she was sure she needed to stay by his side for all the good things he did for her. But she didn't know how to find him again. Until Hannah comments on what Veronica most wanted to hear, that she should be careful when going out, because Leon was staying in a cabin on the next street. Meanwhile, in the palace, Philip was arguing with the condemner for letting Veronica escape, but he explains that he thought she was a nun, while questioning if Leon had helped the girl escape, but the guy denies it, saying he hadn't seen that redhead with the nun. Relieved by the situation, Leon nudges the vice commander, saying he had already told him he didn't participate in the escape. But Philip cannot understand who besides him would have spared the girl and made her escape death. He asserts that he wouldn't let this go, and if he found out that it was he himself who ordered this, he would steal his sacred sword. As he walked through the city, Leon realized that since there had been no news of the fugitive, she was probably alive and safe. And she pretended not to care who she approached, kissed, or even sought out for salvation. And for him, she had been a problem from the very beginning. But the moment he turns into an alley, he comes face to face with her sitting there. Upon seeing Leon, Veronica is happy. All those emotions he was trying to suppress seem to come flooding back at once. Without thinking, he pulls her into a hug. She comments that she missed him, but she was already feeling overwhelmed by so much affection. He takes her inside the room, fearing someone might see her. While continuing to hug her without saying anything, he finally opens his mouth, saying he didn't know she was so irresponsible. He asks why she came back near the palace if she had tried to escape, but the protagonist explains that it was fine since she was careful about who was around her, and the other knights helped her. This mention of knights clearly irritates Leon. He says she is annoying him, and he asks if she came after him because she was thirsty for his divine power. If that was the reason, why didn't she ask Oscar to do it for her? The protagonist is confused and explains that she only came back because she needed to talk to him in person. Veronica believed she needed to be useful, and that's why she says that since he said he needed her visions, and maybe in her mind, if she did everything he needed, who knows, he might start treating her affectionately again. She then says that his father is dead. What she didn't know was that she would regret saying those words. With a serious expression, Leon pulls away from her, questioning who she said was dead. Realizing her mistake, she explains that since no one told her anything, and the commander looked a lot like him. But before she finishes speaking, she starts trembling, apologizing, saying she just wanted to help him. Leon interrupts her, asking if she really saw him die. Sitting on the bed, he asks her to tell him everything that happened after he left. After a long conversation, the guy summarizes everything by saying that Mecklenburg had gone to the mountains because of the prophecy and was now dead. She agrees, saying she had asked him to save Leon. Leon was visibly irritated and asked if she thought she was special or what. After all, she wasn't part of the group of knights, nor his official partner, so she had no right to meddle in personal matters of his life. Awkwardly, she apologizes for intruding, but she says she still had more to tell and reveals that Oscar had helped her escape. Leon responds by asking if she knew why she was in that cell underground, to which Veronica replies that the boy said it was to keep her safe. He coldly responds that if that were really true, the Pope himself should be locked up with her, and the girl wouldn't have been able to escape. And then he says that he was the one who sold her to the Pope. Caught by surprise, she says he is lying. But Leon is determined to lay all the cards on the table and says that if it weren't true, why would he leave her alone even after returning to Carta 2 days ago? She questions why he asked her to wait then, and all that he said in the sacred plains, asking her to like him. Coldly, Leon explains that it was because all of this made her easier to control. He had finally managed to make her fall in love with him, questioning her if she really thought they were in love. Veronica cries, asking if he knew how she felt all this time. He then, without answering the question, sighs and asks her to come closer. Hesitant, she approaches anyway. Staring deeply into his eyes, Then the guy pulls her arm, making her fall into his lap, saying that everyone with the slightest bit of common sense would know this, judging by the fact that she obeyed his orders even after what he said. And he reminds her that he warned her from the beginning. Tightening her back, he says that to find the creature he was looking for, he would go even further. Veronica asks him to let her go as it was hurting when he pressed on her wounds on her back. But he refuses, saying that she was the one who came to him, knowing that this was exactly what she wanted, while kissing her. While Leon kisses her, he can't help but think if she had grown fond of Oscar in the same way, desperately, with her arms tightly around his neck, thinking that she probably didn't know that the things she found dirty and vulgar were exactly those she was doing now. That sticky feeling of desire seemed like it would last forever until he noticed Veronica's face, a tear rolling down her cheeks. Meanwhile, Veronica reflected on how she, an immature girl, had discovered that boy hurt inside, and how together they could become something. But before they could continue what they were doing, they were interrupted by a knock on the door. Insistent, and that ruined the mood. Leon gets up to open the door and says it was probably that nice night behind her. Oscar enters the room, worried that the girl had disappeared. Veronica apologizes, saying she couldn't explain because she didn't want to involve the girl in all of this. Oscar sighs, confessing that he thought someone would have taken her to the papal palace. After all, who would go out without a coat and shoes in that weather? She asks him not to worry because even if she got caught, she wouldn't tell who helped her. While the two talked, Leon frowned. Oscar says he imagined she would be here because he presumed she would go after Leon. The redhead pulls her by the shoulders, asking if Oscar had come all the way there to get that thing back, and saying he was grateful that he took care of her while Leon was away, but it wouldn't be easy to get away, because the streets were full of guys loyal to the papacy. Oscar responds angrily that he shouldn't treat the girl like an object. Leon replies by repeating his words, affirming that he was the one who stole Veronica in the first place, and adds that he was surprised to see how easy it was for Oscar to go against the Pope's orders. Surely the Pope would be very upset to know that his loyal knight had fallen from God's grace. This leaves Oscar indignant, who retorts to Leon. But Veronica interrupts the two, asking them to stop. She confirms that she is fine, so he can leave. And if he is there out of guilt for what happened in that prison, she forgives him. Leon wonders what happened there, not knowing anything about the mistreatment Veronica endured. Seeing that Oscar continues to insist, the protagonist says he has done enough and she didn't want him to get involved in this anymore. He holds back and says that if she needs anything, she can look for him, and he would inform Hannah about his decision, which puts a wicked smile on Leon's face. When the boy leaves the room, he makes a comment about the two having gotten quite close. She simply says she didn't want him to use anyone else. Irritated with his crazy jealousy, he throws her onto the bed and moves closer to her, staring. To keep his mind clear, he tells her that starting tomorrow, she must report all the visions she has, making it clear that he would only let her live because she was more useful that way, obviously taking advantage of the situation to kiss her again. Outside, Leon could only think that seeing how alive the girl was, she probably must have done something with Oscar, and he remembered the words about his father having died. Laughing at the misfortune, he couldn't like that. She said the commander was her father. Remembering as a child, that same man made a point of telling her that from that moment on, her name was no longer Noah Burke, but Leon Burke, and he should forget everything about his past life, especially his name. Leon starts laughing, remembering that and the death of his father, looking like a maniac in the middle of the street, the same man who gave him his divine power, his blood, and also his name. Veronica believes he was a brilliant man who went to the mountains because of Leon, but she knew nothing. Leon was just a hard stain to remove from his life. Because of that, he only had one person who loved him, and that was God, no one else. Leaning against a fountain, a girl approaches and asks if he is crying. Smiling, he affirms that he was not crying. After all, bad people do not cry, precisely because others cry for them. He remembers that those tears from Veronica were probably not for her, but rather out of pity for him. Those words she said to him were etched in his memory about an overwhelming love that can appear just by looking into someone's eyes. Because of that, he realizes that something went wrong. He doesn't know when nor how. Remembering the kisses and moments they exchanged, Leon feels a tightness in his chest and knows that regardless of the reason things went wrong, she needs to be killed. The girl, not understanding anything about the crazy man by the fountain, walks away, while another man approaches, saying that a letter from the Imperial Palace has arrived for him, being called to the palace by Princess Joanna. Without saying anything, he only realizes that a feeling that died and rotted will only devour a soul in flames. That's it, everyone. What did you think of this new series? I personally really enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss the next videos. Kisses, and see you next time.